Bore da i chi gyd, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am ymuno gyda ni ar gyfer ein gwebinar heddi i baratoi i ddarparu'r Cymhwyster dilyniant mewn paentio ac addurno. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for joining us for our webinar on how to prepare to deliver the progression qualification in painting and decorating. Rydym yn gweithio adre, felly ymddeiriadau ymlaen llaw am unrhyw sŵn yn y cefndir ac unrhyw oedi yn y sleidiau. We are all working from home, therefore I apologise in advance for any background noise and any delay in the slides. Dyma'r pumed webinar ar y meysydd masnach unigol ar gyfer y Cymhwyster dilyniant. Gallwch gyfrestru ar weddill y gwebinarau yma ar wefan Sgiliau i Gymru. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am ymunodd yn y gwebinarau ar gyfer y sylfaen. Mae bob recordiad ar wefan Sgiliau i Gymru. This is the fifth in a series of webinars on the individual trade-specific areas for the progression qualification. The links to register on all the remaining webinars can be found on the Skills for Wales website. Thank you to you all who joined the Foundation webinars. All recordings can be found on the Skills for Wales website. Byddwch yn derbyn e-bost cyn diwedd y webinar gyda linc i'n harolwg a'r pwynt pŵer yma yn y Gymraeg a'r Saesneg. Byddem yn ddiolchgar iawn petaech yn cymeryd yr amser i lenwi ein harolwg gan bod eich adborth yn werthfawr iawn i ni. You will receive an email before the session ends with a link to a survey and also this PowerPoint in both English and Welsh. We would be very grateful if you take the time to fill in this survey as your feedback is very valuable to us. Dyma beth fyddwn ni'n mynd trwyddo bore yma. Fe fyddwn ni'n esbonio pam mae gennym ni y cymhwysterau newydd yma, ac yna edrych ar gynnwys y Cymhwyster dilyniant gan edrych yn benodol ar paentio ac addurno. Fe fyddwn nhw'n edrych ar strwythur yr unedau ac yn rhoi amlinelliad o'r asesiadau. Yna fyddwn edrych ar yr adnoddau a fydd ar gael i chi cyn symud ymlaen at y cymau nesaf. Fe fyddwn edrych ar y trefniadau trosiannol sydd ar gael i chi ac i gloi fe fyddwn yn rhoi cyfle i chi ofyn unrhyw gwestiynau. Please rhowch eich cwestiynau yn y tab cwestiynau sydd ar y llaw dde o'ch sgrin. This is what we'll be discussing this morning. We will be briefly going over the transformation of these new qualifications. We will look at the progression qualification content, looking specifically at painting and decorating. We will look at the structure of the units and outline of the assessments. We will then have a look at the resources available for you before moving on to the next steps. We will then look at the transition arrangements that are in place, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. Please type in any questions that you have throughout this webinar in the questions chat tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Fe fydd y cyflwyniad yn para tua awr, gyda hanner awr i ateb unrhyw gwestiynau. The presentation will last around an hour, with around 30 minutes for your questions. Dyma i chi eich cyflwynwyr heddi. Here are your presenters today. We have David Pye, who is the Technical Advisor for Building Services at City and Guilds. And we have Ian Roberts, who's the Technical Advisor for Construction at City and Guilds. And myself, Angharad Lloyd-Bainan, who's the Business Manager for City and Guilds for Wales. If you have a quick look at the reason why the transformation of these new qualifications, felly pam mae'r cymhwysterau newydd yma wedi dod i rym. So in February 2018, Qualifications Wales published the Building the Future report, which was a sector review of qualifications and the qualification system in construction and the built environment in Wales. The report summarised the views of learning providers and a range of professional and representative bodies, together with more than 100 employers and over 900 learners. It included findings from their own review of a sample of qualifications and an international comparison study. So Qualifications Wales outlined findings were that there were inconsistent assessment practice. The assessment is often not well managed and quality assurance can be inconsistent, and some areas of learnings were difficult to assess. There was a need for learners to be able to deal with a range of tasks and to be able to problem solve, which we have incorporated into the new qualifications with aspects such as planning and evaluation skills. And there was a need that qualifications needed to meet the skills needs of Wales, such as heritage buildings, traditional materials, tools and techniques, and how they have changed over time, together with new and emerging technologies in trades. They found the need to rationalise the amount of the 400 plus technical and vocational qualifications in the construction and built environment sector, and the need for having coherence in these qualifications. And they found the need to keep portability between the nations. So the consortium of EAL and City and Guilds have been working with sector bodies to facilitate this and using recognised standards for each trade. So whilst doing this, we have been engaging with a number of stakeholder engagements. We have been working with technical consultants from across Wales, technical working groups and forums, so there's various focus groups, stakeholder forums, and we've been liaising with BACH as well. We've been working with current practitioners across Wales and working with industry to include micro, small, medium and large contractors across the sector. And this is all through the agreement with Qualifications Wales. On the next slide, it just gives you an overview of some questions that you may have regarding the progression qualification. As I've already mentioned, a copy of this PowerPoint will be sent to you, so this is just for your information only and something to refer back to. And on this slide, it shows you the progression qualification, so the different options available to the learner. So option A would be to complete in 1 year in full-time learning before securing an apprenticeship. Option B would be to complete 2 years in full-time learning, therefore doing the foundation first and then moving on to the progression before securing an apprenticeship. And option C would be direct entry into an apprenticeship, and the apprenticeship will be available from 2022. The foundation qualification is the entry point for learners who wish to start their journey towards occupational competence in a construction or building services engineering trade. The progression qualification has been designed as an optional second year for learners to do after the foundation. It's particularly useful as a meaningful programme of study in full-time education if a learner has not secured an apprenticeship. Felly, diolch yn fawr I chi am ymuno. Hoffwn nawr eich drosglwyddo I David Pye a fydd yn eich tywysg trwy y sleidiau nesaf. Thank you very much, and I would now like to pass you over to David Pye, who will take you through the next slides. Diolch, David.
Thank you very much, Anne-Harrod, and welcome everybody. We'd like to introduce to you the joint branded documents relating to the progression qualification. The qualification handbook is a starting point and contains information on staffing, resources, summary of assessment, and qualification content. You will also have an assessment pack and project pack, which gives in-depth information on the assessment requirements, such as centre practicals, resource lists, how to conduct centre assessments. These will also be available in the Welsh language and will be available shortly on the consortium website. Next slide, please, Ian. Let's consider the important rules of combination, and there are 3 core units, which are 201, employment and employability in the construction sector. This will cover things like relevant trade bodies and organisations, principles of self-employment, the importance of personal skills and problem solving, but within the scope of their responsibility. Then we have Unit 202, changing practices over time. This unit covers things such as the changing environment within construction, the changes to construction materials, methods, techniques and tools, the relationship between trades and the environment, and connected practice to construction and building services engineering. And then the final core unit would be 203, planning and evaluating work in the construction sector in Wales. This unit covers things such as calculating costs, determining resource requirements, planning work, and the importance of evaluation of work. Then there are the specific units, which we can see on the following slide. So this slide, you can see the 3 core units that we've discussed, and here, pathway E, painting and decorating, you'll see 4 further units. So they are the core knowledge, preparing surfaces, apply coatings, and hanging wall coverings. So they're all our additional units within pathway E, painting and decorating. As briefly mentioned earlier, the GLH for this qualification is 540, and this is the time the average learner is anticipated to study and be assessed under supervision. This is broken down into 100 hours for the core, 378 hours for the pathway, and 62 hours for the assessment. The TQT also factors in the additional time a learner may spend on their own study, such as revision. So the qualification has 600 hours total qualification time, or 60 credits. Thank you. I'd now like to pass you back over to my colleague Ian, who'll take you through the next section.
Thank you, David and Anne-Harrod, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Now I'd like to take a look into the unit structure of the actual units themselves. There is always a temptation to look at assessments and work backwards to delivery. But if we consider the handbook and the details in the units, we will get a full outlook of the content to be delivered. And just a reminder that the learning outcome is the overview. The assessment criteria start to detail what outcomes is expected for successful assessment, and then the range indicates the breadth of knowledge and skills to be covered. What we have to remember is that all the elements of the range must be covered in the delivery. The unit we have highlighted here is Unit 202, and this is changing practices over time. And you can see at the top of the page, we'll show the unit number and title, and the guided learning hours, which is 45. It then goes on to describe a brief overview of the unit. And in this instance, it is for learners to gain knowledge and understanding of how materials, tools and techniques have changed and adapted from 1919, as well as looking to the future. This is something tutors delivering this content may have to carry out additional research of CPD to update their knowledge and understanding. There is, however, no difference to what we have had to carry out previously when we had to teach new content. Immediately below, you will then see the learning outcomes. And in this instance, we've got learning outcome 1, which is know the changes in construction, pressures and materials over time. It's making special note is that one key difference compared to current qualifications is that we tend not to use active verbs such as state, explain and describe in the criteria. This was to enable the content to be assessed in various different ways. But the depth of content and the section as shown in the blue box on the next slide will provide a good description as to what the depth and content needs to be taught. Following on, we can see the learning outcome discussed on an earlier slide. And here we can see Learning Outcome 2 from Unit 202 with the title, Know the Changes in Construction Methods Over Time. When we look at Criteria 2.1, we can see the heading Pre-1919 Construction Methods and the range is immediately beneath. We then build up to 2.3, which is the 21st century construction techniques and technologies. We could then ask, what does this cover? And this is where we consider the range, off-site manufacturing, prefabricated construction components, 3D printing of construction components, etc. Then we can ask, what depth? The depth in the lower box, in the blue lower box, describes further than the expected outcomes. So let's have a closer look at 2.3. And this states learners will know emerging methods of construction for 21st century buildings. And this should include materials, tools, techniques relevant to their chosen trade, etc. And the depth of content is there to provide you with the information you will require to the depth of coverage that is required. As we are covering the various pathways, I'm now going to reinforce the message from the previous slide and to show how construction is considered in the painting and decorating pathway, as we will take a look at Unit 224, which is hang coverings, standard and foundation papers. You can again see a brief description on what this unit is about: hanging foundation papers, cross-textured and or relief and patterned finishing papers, etc. And at the bottom of the slide, there is learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. And what is worth noting is, no matter which pathway, whether it's brick, wood trades, or paint and decorating, the titles of each learning outcome is exactly the same. It's the criteria and the range that will differ accordingly. Once again, we can see the same layout, and following on from the previous slide, we can see learning outcome 3. And that's comply with given contract information to carry out the work safely and efficiently to the required specification. Criteria and range to cover for 3.1, demonstration of work skills to shade, measure, mark and cut, mix and apply, fault position, fix, trim and clean off. Then in the blue box, you can see the delivery outcome in more depth. For example, 3.1, learners will be able to demonstrate the following skills when hanging wallpaper. Then you can see the skills element. It is worth noting at this point that the criteria and range is extracted from the occupational competency statements set by industry, and it is to enable a smooth transition when the learner is successful in gaining employment. I'd now like to move on. I would now like to take a closer look and discuss with you the assessments. Progression qualification is assessed using 3 assessment methods, which is no different to what you saw earlier in the foundation qualifications, which again is very familiar to what you've seen previously. But here we've got the on-screen assessment, which is externally set and externally marked with an overall weighting of 20%. The practical project covering 1 trade pathway is externally set, internally marked with a weighting of 60%. And the guided discussion is externally set, internally marked with a weighting of 20%. As many learners prefer hands-on experience, this weighting of assessments will identify and reward demonstrated skills within the practical project. We will be going through each method of assessment in the up and coming slides. But before we move on, I would like to reinforce that we will have an assessment pack detailing the requirements of the assessments, which will be available to be downloaded from the Skills for Wales website commencing the Monday, the 10th of May. For each pathway, the on-screen assessments covering the 3 core units is 70 minutes long and contains 45 questions. It is recommended that this is taken prior to the practical and guided discussions. Regarding the practical project, each pathway is made up of 3 tasks that require the learner to plan, perform and evaluate, and this has to be taken before the guided discussion. The guided discussion again is within each pathway and contains 2 parts, including the learner's reflection on the practical project. And this method of assessment is externally set, internally marked and externally verified. And the guided discussion, like we've mentioned previously, can only take place once the learner has completed the practical project. Health and safety assessment is not part of the qualification and is not mandatory. It is, however, to allow the learner to move forward in readiness to carry out the CSCS health and safety test to gain the CSCS competency card, and can be taken at any stage of the assessment process, and this may have already been while working towards their foundation qualification. It is worth noting at this point that the content within the qualification, covering the core units and the skills units, covers all aspects of learning required, which means no additional learning is required. Here we can see some examples of and a selection of the questions from the on-screen tests for paint and decorating. Some are straight multiple choice, some are drag and drop, and others are pictures asking the learner to identify. This will be similar to what we do currently on many assessments, with the addition of a variety of question types. As mentioned previously, the test can be taken at any stage in the assessment process, although it is recommended that it is completed prior to the practical project and guided discussion. I'd now like to take a little bit of a time now to go through the practical project, as this is a new approach to assessment, but it still uses many similar approaches we have used in different previous assessments, particularly when we consider the design type assessments and practicals with supporting evidence, such as materials lists. So whilst it's a new title, the approach will be familiar. And the project is externally set, internally marked, and externally quality assured. The project has 3 elements. Element 1 is planning, element 2, performing, and element 3, the evaluating. And the learner will have 14 hours allocated for the planning of all the 3 tasks, and 40 hours allocated to carry out all the 3 tasks, which is the performing, and 6 hours to evaluate, once again, all the 3 tasks in the project. The learner will not be able to use the time they have been given for each element for another element. For example, if they complete their planning in 12 hours out of the 14, they may not use the other 2 hours for either the performing or the evaluating elements. The learner will be required to devise plans for all the 3 tasks, showing the approach they will take to undertake the work required in the tasks, underpinned by an overall schedule of works. Once the task has been completed, they will be required to evaluate their work, and they must adhere to all relevant health and safety rules and procedures at all times. The planning task will be undertaken in a classroom environment. They will have access to IT equipment and appropriate resources to carry out their research. These materials may include guidance notes, regulations, and manufacturer's instructions or literature. Questions that they may have to ask themselves, and it's good to point this out, is what does a good or a build or / installation look like in my trade area? And how can I achieve this? Which will help them in the activities that they've got to complete. The requirements for the performing element can be found in section 3 of the practical project guide, which contains the project briefs for each trade. If the learner completes in less time, as we've mentioned previously, they cannot use the extra time in the other elements of this project or take time from other elements to add time here. Once the learners have completed the performing element of the project, they must then produce one evaluation report which reflects on the whole project and includes all the tasks. Again, this will be undertaken in a classroom environment under supervision from centre staff, ensuring learners have access to their planning documentation to support the review and evaluation activity. With regards to the marking of the planning, performing and evaluation, there is a marking grid located within the assessment pack to be used for each element. We will be taking a deeper dive into the marking grid in future dedicated sessions, so please look out for future webinars and possibly face-to-face sessions should restrictions reduce in future. I'm now going to take you through an example of a project. Before I would like to begin, I'd like to state that we have taken on board concerns that have been raised regarding the height of the tasks, and the measurements are being amended to read a minimum of 2.2 meters. And this is to save cost of materials and working safely within the college environment, and also not to cause additional workload for tutors and staff if they've got to try and increase the height that they've already got in place. Here we can see an example of the practical project that provides an assessment brief. This is to try and make the assessment as realistic as we possibly can and prepare the learner. Whichever pathway a learner is working towards, the assessment is made up of 3 tasks. In this instance, we've got task A, and the specification is to redecorate a room, which equates to 15 hours. Task B, specification, is to redecorate the wallpapered walls, and these are guided hours of the 18 hours allocated. And then task C is remove existing coatings and apply paint systems, and with again 7 hours allocated. And although these are guided hours allocated, it's ensuring that each task is a guide for learners that will total 40 hours, and this cannot be exceeded. The sample assessments are available from the Skills for Wales website, so please, when the opportunity arises, take a look. If you haven't had the opportunity to be able to see beforehand, please let me just pause for a moment to allow you to look at these examples so you can have a rough idea on what they will look at in future. Whichever pathway the learner is working towards, they will have to complete what you can see on the left of the screen, which is the materials list and then the tools and equipment list as well. That will be required. There will also be an overview materials list for the centre to help plan and prepare. But this, along with the tools and equipment list, isn't to be shared with the learner, as they will make their own as part of their planning activity. The right-hand side of the slide shows the marking grid. And this is an example of what a marking grid will look like. This grid helps us to grade the learner as we use the tolerances to apply the marks, such as the door square within, etc. The defects is 1 to 3 to gain marks between 1 to 3. This is an approach used in some previous qualifications, such as the 6707, so should be familiar to tutors, but if not, it's a fairly straightforward method and is similar to the approach on Wales Skills competition. The guided discussion is in 2 parts, completed in one timed session. It's internally marked and externally verified, and it's carried out in 40 minutes with an additional extra 5 minutes can be allocated to complete their final question. This will explore the learner's knowledge within the chosen pathway. It will also explore their knowledge and understanding of self-employed in their chosen pathway. It is recommended that a gap of no more than 3 weeks is left between the learner's finalisation of their project and the completion of the guided discussion. Moving forward, we will take a deeper dive into the guided discussion as an assessment method in future dedicated sessions. So please look out for future webinars and possibly face-to-face sessions should restrictions reduce in future. To complete this section of the presentation, I'd now like to just provide you with an overview of the assessments we have briefly covered for the progression qualification. Learners will receive provisional grades for the assessments within 1 week of completion. Qualifications will undergo internal and external quality assurance, and the final grading will be issued by City and Guilds. It's worth noting the slight change in procedure to current qualifications. This is to enable us to quality assure and calculate the grading based on results across all 3 assessments. If a learner fails to successfully achieve a pass grade in any of the assessments, then they are permitted to resit or resubmit. And there are no limits to reassessments. However, time may become an issue as learners will require further training and reinforcement prior to further attempts. I would now like to pass you back to David, who will take you through the next items on the agenda. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Ian. Now we'll have a look at some of the resources. You may have seen some of the supporting information in previous webinars, but I'll quickly cover some of this again as a recap and for those who may not have seen it before. Firstly, to help with initial setup, our resource document gives an overview of the requirements to deliver and offer the qualifications. Please access this document in your planning meetings to help answer those questions on resources and staffing and so on. We also have a prospectus document, which will help centres create their own promotional literature and help provide information for learners, parents and employers. Next slide, please, Ian. Here we can see an exemplar of our adaptable delivery planner. We do have a blank version, as it's likely that each centre will consider delivery differently, such as the duration you run each unit and when you build in your practicals. The planner has a row for you to input your units and then the weeks to tick off as you work through the content of each unit. Next slide, please, Ian. To support with your CPD, we will be releasing a quarterly newsletter with links to various opportunities to engage with learning experiences. These may be links to dedicated videos or new manufacturers' instructions and news and so on. Next slide, please, Ian. We're also creating a resource section on the Skills for Wales website to collate learning resources from third parties such as providers and centres. We will also link to relevant courses from trade and industry bodies such as CITB, CIPHE, NFB and various e-learning. This slide shows some of the dates you can expect to see materials come out. So things such as new tutor resources and CPD, May 2021, delivery and assessment guidance in September 21, and employer and CPD materials any moment now. Next slide, please. Thanks, Ian. We have a completely new suite of tutor resources, as you can see on this slide. These have been offered for review and include typical support materials such as presentations and question papers. The typical support material you'd expect to see with a training package. Next slide, please, Ian. Another today is about the progression, but just to point out again, we have a dedicated foundation book created by Hodder Education to support delivery and learning across the foundation core units. There is a sample chapter which can be accessed through the link that you see on the slide. But on the next slide, what we can see is in addition to this book, Hodder are creating free mapping documents into the current trade specific textbooks so they can be used with the new suite of qualifications. So in addition to the foundation book, you will have mapping documents so you can continue to use the current books for the progression and apprenticeship qualifications. So let's move on and have a look at the next steps. Here we can see several key dates, a couple I'd like to highlight, and the overview of teaching and learning webinars which are planned for May 2021, with some follow-up sessions, hopefully face-to-face, to follow in the next academic year. And the go live and first teaching in September 21. So that's not too far away now. On the next slide, we can see some of the transition requirements. Excuse me. These have been discussed before, and Qualification Wales have run webinars on these, which are available to view, but let's have a brief recap. A learner completing a broad level 1 qualification this year, it's suggested, could progress into the foundation. Someone completing a trade-specific level 1 may progress to the foundation or progression. This would depend on the suitability of the learner to go into the progression at that stage. A learner completing level 2 trade-specific this year may progress to the progression or the level 3 trade-specific. There are also other options, and we suggest you consider the list diagram when considering suitable destinations for learners. From the next slide, this shows a journey for learners starting in 2022, showing a broad level 1 and the foundation as the suitable starting points and the new apprenticeship for learners who are employed. This slide looks a lot more basic and simplistic because it's now moving into the full suite of new qualifications. Here we can see a link to all future webinars. Please take a look at the selection of support and register for suitable webinars. We can see on this slide some of the boxes showing all the upcoming webinars and their dates. So please take a closer look at this and register. Even if you don't think you can make it live, it's worth registering because then it will send you an automatic link to the recording. It saves you having to go and look for it. So on our final slide, we can see that we've covered the main presentation. So thank you very much to Ian for providing the main part of that presentation and creating the PowerPoint to deliver from. Also thank you to Anne Harrod. what we'll do now is I'll just pause for a moment to see if you've typed in any questions, and please use this time to type in your questions. We'll do our very best to answer them all as best we can, and we'll make sure, hopefully, that you've got all the information you need at the end of this session. Once we've answered all the questions, we'll look to close. So no questions in just yet. If anyone would prefer to ask the question, we can unmute people. And but if you just type it in initially, and we can always unmute you, you can discuss it. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be just a discussion topic or something you'd like us to consider again or go over, or just queries or some of your thoughts or barriers or the positives that you see in the changes. Please do share any points or thoughts you do have. We won't stay on the webinar for too much longer. If you don't have those questions, we won't make you stay here. We all know that you're very, very busy and there's lots going on at your centres currently, so we appreciate that, but we do want to use this time to try and answer any questions that you may have. Ian, whilst we're waiting for a couple of questions to come through, there's a couple that have come up before and we've discussed. Could you just give a little bit of background to the 3 core units in the progression, please?
Yes, David. The 3 core units, as we mentioned earlier, is to give people that opportunity and the brief knowledge of understanding of the industry itself. So like you mentioned earlier, David, it's not necessarily got to be delivered in a classroom environment. It could be done through research, development, to try and help the learner get a better knowledge and understanding of the actual units themselves, to be able to move them forward. Like we've mentioned earlier, the guided learning hours are there. It's broken down, and it is a guide to be able to help them understand what the actual particular units are and the length of time to deliver them. But also, when we spoke previously about the relevant units, and I know we keep mentioning about Unit 202, for example, and the relevant criteria that's in there. And what we have to remember is that, you know, changing practices over time, it's something that's been really wanted. It was clearly identified in the review. How can we cover that? How can we move it forward? Especially when you look at the pre-1919 buildings, how can we make sure we maintain them properly and effectively? And then moving forward to the current day, the new technologies that's coming into it. And that's the main reasons that they've actually come in here. And I understand some people have been slightly concerned over this regarding what additional CPD will I need and everything else. And it's not dissimilar to what we've done previously, when we've had new content to teach and deliver and move forward. So we may need to do a bit of research ourselves, but we will be also offering CPD events and things like that to help people to bring themselves up to speed with this if required. And it's something that Barker also looking at as well, to be able to move that forward. So with regarding to the units, it's no difference to what we've probably already taught previously. And I'm just thinking Unit 202 is probably the one that's had the most significant changes regarding the learning and the learning outcomes, because it's now specifying and particular to changing practices from pre-1919 to current day. So without going into more detail with that, breaking it down, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Ian. We do have a question coming. Will there be funding for a learner progressing from a broad level 1 qualification through to an apprenticeship? It potentially maybe 5 years.
Our understanding is, Dave, that's something that Qualifications Wales are looking at closely now, working with the Welsh Government. And we believe there will be, but how much funding there is there, we can't really stipulate because they've not come to that decision yet. But it's something that Qualifications Wales, along with the Welsh Government and principals and vice principals of colleges, are working closely with at this moment in time. And I'm sure as soon as that information comes out, that will be shared with people like ourselves and tutors as well.
Yeah, don't see why not, really. I mean, we have level 1 courses at the moment and people progress into apprenticeships on frameworks. So I see that as a natural pathway that hasn't really changed. So I would imagine that, you know, if there's funding for level 1s and there's funding for apprenticeships, there wouldn't be an issue with that. I don't see why there would be, but it's always worth us making a note. Another question coming in, are the smart screen resources free and when are they available?
Smart screen resources will be free because that's part of the agreement between Qualifications Wales and the consortium. They'll start to be uploaded end of April, some resources, and they'll keep getting drip fed onto the Skills for Wales website from now right through till July. So they will be ongoing. If people would like to view them, please contact your head of construction because they're working closely. What's got to happen is that we can provide opportunities for people to view these as they're being developed, to be honest, and some as they're being developed, so you don't have to see them actually. The outcome is you can have an input in between, and we've worked closely with BARC, who will then, if people are asking, they will then direct the individual names who want access to that, and it'll be through a team site. So you can see it as they're being developed, but as soon as they are developed, because they've got to be in Welsh as well as English before we can upload them onto the Skills for Wales website, and that's the agreement through Qualifications Wales, that we can't upload anything until it's in Welsh as well as English. So they'll start coming on board on the website in end of this month, and then they'll keep getting drip fed into it all the way through. The textbooks, of course, there'll be a cost for the textbooks, but the foundation textbook will be ready by, I think it's ready end of April again. And then hopefully what they will do as well, like David mentioned earlier, they're putting a free mapping document in. So if you've already got the textbooks, the levels 1, 2 and 3, they're putting a mapping guide together so you can use the current textbooks that you already have. The shared resources as well through third parties, there will also be links to be put onto the Skills for Wales website as well as, so you can gain access to them. So at this moment in time, they're all free and they will be free moving forward. There will be some elements of it that gets developed over and above that there will be additional cost to them, such as example is the enhanced smart screen. So there'll be the normal package that'll be free for everybody, then the enhanced smart screen and the textbooks will have to be paid for moving forward. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Ian. There's no further questions at the moment. Ian, if we could just finish off the presentation with the last 2 slides, and then we can double back to the to see if there's any other questions come up, if that's okay, please.
Definitely, David. I'll start now. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're just going to cover a couple of final slides. Just one is a call out really for your feedback. It's so important. I know you're always being asked for feedback. Every time you do a session, it seems as though we continually ask for feedback. But it's so important with this project because we see this project as working alongside you as providers whilst we develop the material and the qualifications to the requirements of Qualification Wales. So we're acting very much as a conduit between providers, QW, and trying to create a great product for everyone to benefit from and the learners themselves. And what helps us really is your feedback and your thoughts as we develop this. So it's so important to us. So whilst I know you're being mithered for feedback all the time, it's really important if you can share your feedback after today. Tell us what you think is good, what you think you'd like to see differently, how the support works. Is this helpful? Has your time been valuable on today's presentation? We'd love to hear about that. What else you'd like to see? Anything that's constructive that we can improve on, anything that you like, please report that as well, because we do more of it if you tell us what you do like. So we do appreciate your time showing some feedback. And the final slide includes an email we've been promoting. So that's skillsforwales.customer@sittingills.com. You can always contact myself or Ian, and we'll always try and help you and answer your questions as much as we can. But that is our central email address for this project. And if you've got some centralized thoughts or feedback that you'd like to share formally, it's a good email to share it on. If you have a question that you want logged as being asked, and therefore it can be considered by the consortium, and we can respond formally from the consortium. So certainly some questions are probably better fitting for that email address. Just some casual questions about dates or webinars coming up, you can probably just drop me or Ian a line. So they're just the last 2 slides. We'll double back and look at the questions just in a moment, but just in case I forget, or if you have to dash off to anywhere, just really a big thank you very much to you all for attending. We know you're very busy at centres at the moment. There's a lot of pressure. It's that time of year. You're coming towards summer and looking at completions. So we do appreciate you taking the time out to listen to us. We hope you found it valuable. Big thank you to Ian as well, who's done a lot of work in the background, making these happen and creating the material. You know, it takes a long time to pull all this together and make all the arrangements. So big shout out to Ian Roberts for doing that, and also our colleague Anne Harrod, who's been excellent in the introductions and opening up in Welsh and supporting us with that. So thank you very much to the team at the consortium and the providers for coming along and listening to us. So now I'll just have a quick look back at the questions. Yes, Ian, did you have a point? Sorry.
I think there's a bit more on the, I don't know if you've answered the question correctly on other smart screen and when will they be available. Sorry, I did cover that question, I do believe. I'm just questioning myself now whether or not I've questioned the resources. They will be available with the resources, as I've said, as they're being drip fed onto the Skills for Wales website, and they'll start from end of April through till June, July, and we'll keep sending out email alerts alerting you when they are on there, if that answers your question, to be able to move that forward. Okay.
I think you covered it, Ian, but it's worth make a second good point there, is that when we're developing the materials, obviously throughout any development, some is created first and then the next bit will be along a couple of weeks later, and then something else goes out for proofreading. It may take a bit longer to come back. So it's not as if there'll be a date when everything is available on the same day. You'll start to see it become available periodically or over time. So apologies for that. So yeah, so just keep a lookout, and as Ian says, what we will do is keep sending out alerts and reminders when new material becomes available. We'll try and keep you up to date as much as we can with that.
Thank you, David, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending.
So there's no final questions then. So I think what we should do is close, but you know, if you think of something after today, please do get in touch with us and you know, drop us a line, ask us a question. Let's stay in touch, let's support each other and work with each other as we create these new qualifications to the benefit of all. So yeah, for the final time, thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe. Goodbye.
Yeah, goodbye, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.